Anyway, it is time now, so we're going to start. Before I start, though, I think we should address the elephant in the room, which is my hair. Obviously, you might be wondering what's going on with that. Well, for a long time now, I have become what is typically called follically challenged. Okay, I've been going quite bald. And like many men in my situation, I this year decided to go to Turkey to get a hair transplant. Now, little did I know that the clinic that I chose it's not part of the gig. Little did I know that the clinic, the hair transplant clinic that I chose, only uses hair donated by browser developers. Okay? I don't really like Gen AI, but for this kind of thing, I like to make an exception, right? Just get everything so wrong. Am I trying to say that all browser developers are clowns? No. Okay? They sometimes do seem to do some clownish things, though. Okay? Case in point, what we're going to talk about today is that some of the browsers do what I like to call a two-phase or a two-step loading process, where they don't load everything on the page at once. They load one part, and when that's done, they start loading the second batch of resources. Because of this, you get weird situations like this, where we have three very different waterfalls in the three browsers for the exact same HTML page. The same HTML, and it's a very simple one, we're going to show it later. Simple HTML still loads radically different in all the three main browsers. Now you tell me that is not a bunch of clowns trying to take on their audience with stupid jokes. Okay? So what I'm going to try to do today is try to explain why this happens, why these loading behaviors are there, and then maybe also give some ways to try and combat these inconsistencies between browsers. So let's start with the why. And it turns out that it's not the browser developers who are the clowns. It's usually more the server developers. Okay? You wouldn't believe the weird stuff that servers do. This one, for example, send back. I requested images in 1, 2, 3 order. It's sent back in 3, 2, 1. Okay? And in this case, the first image, the top one there, was my largest contentful paint image, so the most important image on the page. The one that Google looks at for SEO things. So that was the delay behind these two other less important images. It's not just these simple examples either. This is a more complex one, where a very important JavaScript on top and some important fonts also were being delayed by a bunch of images, these purple things in the middle. A ton of images that I really didn't need at that point. I really wanted the JavaScript first. But the server was sending me other stuff than I had requested. Now you might think, Robin, how is that the server's fault? How is the server supposed to know what it needs to send when? Well, because the browser literally tells the server what it needs to send when. This is something called the prioritization system. So the browser is basically going to assign a priority, a level of importance to each type of resource it discovers. For example, render blocking CSS in the head, super important, highest priority. Partial blocking JavaScript, also important, high priority. Defer JavaScript, if you add defer, that means that the browser can execute this JavaScript after the main page is done loading. So it doesn't really have to execute or download immediately, so it gets a low priority. And then you have things like preload, things that this browser knows it might need, but not discoverable right now, might get a medium priority, right? So the browser actively tries to guess which things are most important when, and it communicates this to the server. The ways it does this are kind of difficult to explain. Most modern browsers, you can now see this in a request header. There's literally a priority request header that tells you when which resource should be coming in. This is very important, especially for HTTP 2 and 3, because they use a single underlying TCP or quick connection to send the resources on. So they have one connection for many different things, and if they get the order wrong, there is not going to be room on that connection for the more important stuff if you keep sending me low priority images, server. Okay? So it is important if we get these orders straight. And again, it's the servers who often make mistakes in this. This is research I did a couple of years ago. The top is what the browser sends. So this is the browser is expecting to see that. You could see a lot of some very well-known servers get it nearly right, Apache, not quite right, Nginx, and then completely wrong, Node.js. And the thing is, this last one is actually one of the worst possible cases for web performance. If you send your resources like this, your page is going to take a very, very long time to load. You might say, Robin, oh, that's research you did a couple of years ago. Since then we have HTTP 3, everything is much better, right? Right. I did research again last year. This is very fresh. Looked at a ton more. Very well-known companies and hosting providers, only 2. 2 out of all of these get this right. It's not that everyone else gets it completely wrong. Okay, there's a lot of gray area in there. But still, only 2 of these actually do what they're supposed to do and listen to what the browser is telling it. Okay? So with that in mind, imagine that you are one of these people. Okay? One of the browser developers. How would you deal with this, right? You have a browser, you see in your analytics coming in, a lot of servers are not listening to us, they're doing very weird stuff. How can we protect ourselves against that if the server isn't even listening? Okay? And one of the ways they do that is that thing that I mentioned before, this two-phase loading. The idea there is, let's say you have a web page with 100 resources. If you request all 100 of them at the same time, which you could, it's allowed in HTTP 2 and 3, should be possible. If you do 100 at the same time, the server has 100 different ways to mess it up. However, if you only request the top 10 or maybe top 20 most important resources first, and you delay the 80 other ones until those are done, then yes, the server is still going to mess up those 10 to 20, but at least only those at the beginning. You're not going to be delaying your JavaScript for very low priority images down the line. Right? So that's kind of one of the main reasons that we have this setup. So browsers trying to protect themselves against wrong servers. Not the only reason this is still around, but one of the main reasons that we have this. And because of that, is one of the main reasons that we get these very different waterfalls. Because of course, none of the browsers agree on how to best do this two-phase loading thing. Okay? All of them have a different opinion on how to best do that. And when I started, it was very frustrating because almost none of this was documented at all. The only thing that we had was a Google Doc from one of the Chromium developers that had a very short description of what this was doing. We're going to look at it soon. Very short description, and that was it. Super vague, super difficult to interpret. There was nothing for Safari, nothing for Firefox. This has since slightly improved with a couple of articles. May or may not be due to some of my nagging, to be honest. But still, it's very underdocumented what this does and how it does it. So that's why I'm doing this talk today. Because of this, because of the underdocumentation, I had to do a lot of my own research. Okay? So I spent a lot of weeks setting up different types of sites, trying out in the different browsers to get this working. So I'm going to present to you my research now, and because I know that the academics like that, I'm going to try to change it to a bit more formal wear, like this, to get the mic going. There we go. Very nice. So let's talk about the results. I'm going to talk about Chrome first, right? Because it has the most complex and most evolved system in here. So we can get all of the concepts from Chrome, and then we can look at Safari and Firefox next. So again, Chrome, for a long time, all we had was literally these 4 lines in that Google Doc. That's it. That's all you got. And we're going to read them now. They're not very intelligible. So Chrome loads resources in 2 phases. Tight mode is the initial phase and constrains loading lower priority resources. So it delays lower priority resources until the body is attached to the document. Until the body is attached to the document. I have no clue what he's saying here. Okay? Luckily, the writer anticipated my stupidness. They actually added another line. They say, what does it mean? It means essentially after all blocking scripts in the head have executed. So all blocking JavaScript in the head has to be done executing before tight mode can exit. Okay? Keep that in the back of your mind. That's going to be important. Last sentence is, in tight mode, low priority resources are only loaded if there are less than 2 in-flight requests at the time that they are discovered. Okay, I'm not going to explain that one. We're going to see a couple of examples of that later. But I hope you can agree with me, this was not clear at all what the browser was trying to do. So I had to put on my academic wear. First thing we need to understand is, what do these lower priority resources mean? Right? It delays lower priority resources. What does that mean? Well, Chrome has a specific way of giving priorities to resources. HTML and CSS are going to be highest priority. JavaScript in the head, so the synchronous blocking JavaScript, is going to be high. And then it kind of depends. Asynchronous and deferred JavaScript is obviously going to be less important because it executes later in the page load. So Chrome gives it a low priority. Similar to images. In the body, they also get a low priority. Now, when a document says low word priority, it actually means medium, low, and lowest. So during tight mode, that first initial phase, only highest and high resources will be loaded. Everything else, Chrome intentionally delays until that is done. And I can very easily illustrate that with this very simple page. These are just 2 render blocking JavaScripts. So synchronous JavaScripts in the head, and then 10 images. And I've intentionally delayed those JavaScripts. The server waits 2.5 seconds until it starts replying. So you can clearly see that while the browser has discovered all 12 resources at the same time, it waits requesting the images until the 2 JavaScripts are done. It waits requesting them, not even downloading them, requesting them until the 2 JavaScripts are completely done loading. Clearly showing that there is this tight mode thing going on. Now, this is what you would have seen in Chrome about 1.5 years ago. If you do this now, you will see something more like this, where suddenly 5 of those images are being loaded in that tight mode at first phase as well. And this is because about 1.5 years ago, Chrome made a change to its priority system, where it says the first 5 images on a page are not the default low priority, they are now the medium priority. The idea being that that largest colorful paint image is probably one of those first 5. So if they make this change at the browser level, they might improve LCP times for the internet as a whole. Okay? That was the idea behind this. You might still be confused, because medium is still not allowed in tight mode, right? But still they were downloading in tight mode. So they also updated tight mode logic, saying that from this point on, tight mode can also load 2 medium priority resources at a time. And that explains what we saw then, right? So we have the 2 JavaScripts, tight mode, and then there are 2 medium at the time. So the first 5 images, the first 2 can start. When those are done, we have allowance for 2 more, 2 slots open up. Those, and then there's 1 just left over, gets loaded. And then we again have to wait until the end of tight mode before requesting the next images. So that's the basics of this. Now let's get to that weird last sentence of that paragraph that I showed before, right? Low priority resources are only loaded if there are less than 2 other in-flight requests. So what I've done here, it's the same page, but I've just delayed the first JavaScript a bit less. It already returns after, I guess, 1.5 seconds. But the other one keeps running. So what you have from the point that the first JavaScript completes, there's only 1 high priority resource in flight, that JavaScript. Which means we can now start loading 1 lower priority resource as well, which is that first image. So that one gets done. Again, a slot opens up for low priority images, the next one, the next one, the next one, and so on and so forth, until tight mode is done. Right, so that's what that second sentence means. I hope that still makes sense, because from now on, it's gloves off. Something that I found very surprising is that tight mode really is only while there are blocking scripts being downloaded, not CSS. This is a very similar page, just without JavaScript and just 3 CSS files in the head. And even though the CSS files are render blocking, there is no tight mode. Everything gets requested at the same time, because tight mode is only triggered by scripts in the head. Very surprising to me. was even surprising to browser developers at Chrome that I talked to, because they thought it was included. Fantastic. So, now that you guys all know the basics, okay, it's time to put that to the test. Okay, I'm going to ask you to think a little bit for yourself. You don't have to shout out anything, just think for yourself. Given this page, what is that going to look like in a waterfall? And why? How is this going to get loaded? So we have 2 render blocking JavaScripts of high priority, 2 deferred JavaScripts, which in Chrome are going to be low priority. And then we have our 10 images again. First 5 are medium, and then we have 5 lows. 10 seconds, imagine what the waterfall is going to look like. Now I realize this is a bit difficult. To really do this, you kind of need a nose for these kind of things. So let's see. What basically happens is we first download those 2 high priority JavaScript images in tight mode, along with the 5 medium priority images. And then, after tight mode is done, only then do we request the deferred JavaScript and the rest of the images. Okay. Now, I hope this is somewhat obvious, given the explanation I did just now, right? It just follows these priorities. That's what it does. To me, when I started out web development, and even a couple of years ago, this would not have made any sense. I would have thought things in the head of the page should be much more important than anything in the body. Okay, that's why we have the head versus the body, right? This is clearly no longer the case. And this might be obvious for some of you here. I can pretty much guarantee that, especially for newer programmers, newer developers, this might come as quite a shock when they first discover this. Okay. So this is Chrome. Chrome really follows the priorities to determine tight mode. Let's talk about Safari. Yeah. For those in the know, that is not Barry Pollard, by the way. There's someone else. Safari, very interestingly, I did the exact same test. So Chrome is on top, Safari on bottom. We can immediately see 2 clear things. One, Safari clearly has that tight mode. It is still delaying requesting those images until the JavaScript is done. So it has a tight mode. Second thing, it doesn't do that medium priority thing for the first 5 images that Chrome does. It still basically is what Chrome was doing up until a year and a half ago. It also does that weird, you can download lower priority things if there are only one other thing in flight at the same time. That's also the same as Chrome. Very clear. Again, here the similarities end, and everything goes in different directions. For example, I just told you that Chrome doesn't really care about CSS in the head for tight mode, only scripts. Well, Safari does, because of course it does. In Safari, if you have CSS in the head, it is going to trigger tight mode, and it is going to delay images or low priority stuff until the CSS is downloaded. Very, very clear difference between the 2. Then I decided, let's look at what happens if I move my JavaScript outside of the head. Because again, Chrome says only blocking stuff in the head. So if I put the exact same JavaScript on top of the body, which by the way is still parser blocking, is still going to stop rendering the page, same effect, but Chrome doesn't really care. It says, oh, it's not in the head, I don't need tight mode, I'm just going to request everything at the same time. Safari does not. Safari indeed says, this is a blocking JavaScript, everything after it should be blocked. And I thought, okay, that's going to be everything after it, so I wanted to verify that. So I put everything on the bottom of the page. And you can indeed see Safari seems to do what I thought it does. Nothing before the JavaScripts are being blocked, as long as the JavaScripts are on the bottom. So just to be sure, just to cover all my bases, I had to go ahead, I had to do it, and put the JavaScript in the middle of the page. I mean, at least Chrome is consistent. Safari, I really tried to find out what the hell it is doing. I couldn't find the logic that they're doing. Sometimes they do block stuff before, sometimes not. Sometimes they even block things after. It's very inconsistent. But it is clear that they do some more advanced logic than Chrome when it comes to resources in the body. Okay? So, slightly more difficult exercise. Exact same HTML, people. Exact same. I didn't change anything about the HTML. What is this going to look like in Safari? So let's see. Safari obviously has type mode. What is requested in type mode? The high priority JavaScript, but also the deferred JavaScript as well. Right? And I tested this further. Even if there is no synchronous JavaScript, what's going to happen? Safari is not going to trigger type mode for deferred or asynchronous JavaScript. So by itself, it won't trigger type mode if it's not going on. But if type mode is in effect, they will get requested during type mode, just to make things easy for web developers. And again, to reinforce, this is what it looks like, right? Chrome, very, very different in Safari because they fundamentally treat these things differently. And so for Chrome, I kind of can know what's going on now. That's kind of what the doc says. Safari, I'm still a bit in the dark. I have the high-level things that they do, but they still have some weird heuristics going on there, like with async and defer, that I don't know why they're there, what the logic is behind them, or how consistently they're being applied. Okay. That's Chrome and Safari. Let's go to Firefox. And this is a little bit dangerous for me right now, because there are a ton of Mozillians in the room. So please don't kill me. Okay. Now for Firefox, I can actually be quite short. It doesn't do type mode at all. Okay? Whatever you put on your page, Firefox is very happy to just request it all at the same time. Thank you very much. At the server development. Okay? In a way, the most pure of the three browsers, because it trusts in the standards, it trusts in the networking algorithms that they will get it right. Now, I did this talk a couple of months ago, and I didn't explain this further. And the talk I posted to YouTube, and it got a lot of views, including some of the Firefox fan club. Apparently, these guys have a lot of very passionate, very vocal fans who believe that Firefox is the best browser. And they kind of misinterpreted what I was saying. They thought that I said, oh, it doesn't do type mode, which means it is somehow the worst browser or the slower browser of the three. That's not what I was trying to say at all. Okay? In fact, you could argue that for servers that do it correctly, Firefox should be a little bit faster. Because it requests everything. The server can correctly prioritize things, and it can start filling caches, start pulling things in from an origin if you're a CDN, right? So it should actually be faster for proper servers. And even on servers that make mistakes, it's highly going to depend on what the server is doing and the web page, if that actually matters that much in practice. Okay? So I'm not trying to say that Firefox is somehow the worst browser for not doing type mode. The main message, again, I'm trying to bring is it's crazy that all three browsers handle the same simple HTML page in such different ways. It is very confusing and very annoying if you try to make a web page that will perform well in all the three browsers. And for a long time, it was even more annoying, even more confusing, because there was actually no way that you could manipulate the browsers. You could tweak the behavior. There was no way to do that. Let's say the browser gets it wrong, and there's something in type mode that should be not, or vice versa. There was no way for you to manipulate that. You were stuck with what the browser was doing. Now, luckily, over time, people got the message that we needed some kind of mechanism to improve this, to be able to deal with these browser consistencies. We needed a weapon of our own in the fight against the browsers. And this used to be a balloon sword, but the radiators are way too warm. That's the popping you heard at the beginning. So let me use my backup. Let's call it a katana. Let's do that, right? So the weapon that we eventually ended up with, for this is something called fetch priority. Okay? You can now add fetch priority to just about anything. Like a ton of things can now be manipulated with fetch priority, and that directly influences that priority that the browser assigns to a given resource. Okay? You don't set the priority directly. Yeah? You can only do fetch priority high or low, not highest or lowest or medium. That's not how it works. What you're basically telling is the browser, it should be a little bit higher than what you might think it should be, or lower than what the browser thinks, not a fixed priority. Okay? We're going to see that creates issues of its own. But with that is a very powerful tool to indeed try and move some things around in the page loading process. For example, if you have something in the second phase and you want to get it into tight mode, that's very easy to do in Chrome because, again, it's all priority based. In Safari, it's slightly more difficult because it has other heuristics. In practice, I only found this to work for images. But that is the most important use case anyway, which is trying to put fetch priority high on your LCP image. So your largest colorful paint image, that one image that Google looks at for its metrics. If that is in the second phase, that's obviously going to be slow. With fetch priority high, you can bring this into the tight mode phase, so it loads much earlier, both in Safari and in Chrome. Yes, I kept the slide in. Slightly more difficult to see in Chrome because it has weirder waterfalls. But here again, the fifth image there will get requested at high priority early on because it is the LCP image. So that's one way you can get things into tight mode. Then you might also want to get things out of tight mode. Okay, the browser is too eager. You know that you won't need this resource early on. So you're explicitly telling the browser, please back off a little bit. Again, Chrome works very well. Fetch priority low works very well in a variety of use cases. Safari, I tried. I couldn't find a single one. The main use case I wanted to use this for was what we had before, right? You have your deferred JavaScripts that I know won't be needed. I don't want to load my deferred JavaScripts that early on. I want them out of tight mode into the second phase. There's no way to do that. I can put fetch priority low on it, and it lowers it from high to medium, but it doesn't shift it out of tight mode. Other heuristics to determine what it should look like. Chrome and Safari, they use tight mode. Firefox doesn't use tight mode at all, which means that fetch priority is a super powerful mechanism in Firefox because you have very fine-grained control over how to order resources at the server. Which is why it's slightly ironic, guys, that Firefox was the last browser to actually ship this. But I'm very happy to say that they shipped this a couple of months ago. It's now available in all the browsers. Very nice. And Firefox's implementation is actually quite good. It's quite flexible. It's quite advanced. You have a lot of control over all the things that you want to do. And they even added the documentation page for it. In 2025, can you imagine that? Amazing. But seriously, thank you. The problem is, even with this, even though we can now very fine-grained control Firefox, that's not enough. Because if we optimize everything for Firefox, we might still making things worse in the other two browsers. Because you guessed it, priorities are not consistent along the browsers. I always like to use the font example because it's so weird. For fonts, normal fonts are going to be highest priority in Chrome and low priority in Firefox. Almost the complete opposite. And if you then preload a font, so preload is basically the font is probably going to be in another CSS file, but I know you're going to need it, so maybe you can start requesting it earlier. That's what preload does. Browsers take that as a very different signal. Firefox says, oh, you're telling me about a new resource. I'm going to bump it in priority. It goes from low to medium. And Chrome says, oh, you're telling me about this resource? That must mean you don't like it at all. I'm going to move it from highest to high. Let's make it worse. Let's add fetch priority. Fetch priority high, Chrome does not care about your fetch priority high. Okay? It was at high, it's going to stay at high. Safari and Firefox are going to bump it 1, so from medium to high. Fetch priority low, both Chrome and Firefox make it -2, because -1 is so bourgeois, you know. Why not go for -2 to really give it a kick? Well, Safari just goes for -1, obviously, right? So they're very inconsistent. And this is a problem because bumping these things around will impact other resources that have their own priorities. And they also have other inconsistent ways of distributing this. So you end up not knowing what the order of priorities is going to be in all the other browsers if you optimize for, say, Firefox. And the best example of that I found for today is that there is no way in Firefox to get that LCP image to load before your deferred JavaScript. So let's say we have, on top, we have a deferred JavaScript and then an image without fetch priority high. By default, you would load the JavaScript first and then the image. That's the default scheduling behavior in all the browsers. In Chrome and Safari, as you can tell, if you add fetch priority high, the image is now going to get a higher priority than the JavaScript, and it's going to be loaded before the JavaScript. With or without tight mode, this doesn't even have to do with tight mode anymore. With or without tight mode, your image is going to come in before your JavaScript, as you probably want, because this is your LCP image. In Firefox, you can't do that, because for some reason, Firefox images begin at ultra low priority. That's one step below lowest. I had to invent that just for Firefox. Okay? Everyone else is at low. Firefox is at ultra low. So yes, doing fetch priority high bumps it 2 steps from ultra low to low, but that's still the same as the deferred JavaScript. So there's no way to get your LCP image on top of your deferred JavaScript without also marking the deferred JavaScript as fetch priority low. Okay? Now, preempting the Firefox FanForce 5 club. Okay? I'm not saying this makes Firefox a worse browser. Okay? In fact, I could have easily shown examples where the other browsers don't allow you to do things. In fact, I did show some examples of that, right? It's not that Firefox or any of the other is worse or faster. I'm again mainly talking about how frustrating it is that they all do things in so many different ways. Okay? This means that for me as a developer, it is almost impossible to create a web page that performs, that has good web performance and consistent web performance on all 3 of the browsers. Almost impossible in today's ecosystem. And I could forgive this if this was just tight mode and if it was just the priorities. Maybe. But of course, I looked at tons of other stuff as well. I didn't have time today. Believe me, none of these things are consistent along the browsers. And they can have very big impacts on how resources are loaded and when things get drawn on the screen. Right? It is not just 1 or 2 things, it is the whole ecosystem that is very difficult to do. And that brings me to the original inspiration for today's talk, which is this meme. Right? If you're a new web developer starting now, even if you follow the standards, even if you use one of the big known platforms and CDNs, you cannot be sure that your thing is going to be loading well in all the browsers and all the environments. It's not really the fault of the developers either. You know, we have been trained to look at just what I like to call the Chrome Web Vitals, right? Not the core Web Vitals, the Chrome Web Vitals. Even though, has to be said, Firefox is doing an excellent job in catching up there. Safari, of course, is not. People look at this. People mostly test in Chrome. And they think whatever works well in Chrome is also going to do well in Firefox and Safari. And as I just tried to explain, that's absolutely not the case. And because these metrics are missing for the other browsers and some tools are missing for the other browsers, people typically don't test, don't verify. And so a lot of sites, I think, are much slower on Safari and Firefox than they could be or should be. Okay. What I think we need, I'm not sure that the browsers need to be more consistent with each other. It's very difficult to know which browser is doing it right. It's very difficult to know which is the faster approach. I would settle for having this all well documented. Having this properly on, something like a web.dev, which is way too Google focused for me, even though it's a great resource. Even on something like MDN, which is way too focused on the standards for me and doesn't actually explain things that are not regulated by standards, like everything I talked about today. We need more documentation. We need more people to be aware of this so that they can actually test for these outliers. So I'm hoping to contribute with that with my talk today. I'm going to finish now, because I'm all out of time, with the best analogy that I've ever found for how an HTTP3 connection works. Thank you very much.